So last time we looked at the while loop, which is what we call a precondition loop, because there is a condition that is checked before any code is run. If the condition is true, the code runs. If the condition is false, the code does not run. If the while loop encounters a true condition, it will repeat until that condition is no longer true. If the condition is false initially, then the code never executes. So a while loop is guaranteed to run 0 times. So we'll make a note of that. Guaranteed to run at least 0 times. Because you may have 0 runs, you may have 1 run, you may have a bunch of runs, but you know that it will run at least 0 times. And we're emphasizing all of this because we have this code here, we'll run it, and we get the before the while loop, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, after the while loop. I'm going to reinitialize my value to have the same start value, and I'm going to get my print line, I'm going to get my other print line. Because there's another loop, and this is not a precondition loop. This is what's called a post-condition loop. So the way this looks is like this. All right. This is called the do while loop. And the way this works is that the code runs, then the condition is checked. And so because of that, you can actually run code before the condition is ever checked. Because of this, we call this a post-condition loop, where you check the condition after running. Since you're not checking the condition until after the code executes, the do while loop actually has to run at least 1 time. There's no way around it. The do while loop has to run 1 time or more. The reason it runs once, again, is because the condition is not checked until after the code runs. Whereas with the while loop, the condition is checked before the code runs. And look at the syntax here. We'll do it very similarly. We do, curly braces, and then we have the exact same code in here. We'll just stick that in here. And then after the second curly brace, we get while. Then the condition is checked, and we'll say while my value greater than 0, and then we enter the semicolon. This looks a little bit different. The while loop has this block of code and no semicolon, because a code block is almost never followed by a semicolon. But the do while loop does have a semicolon because the end of the condition here is kind of like a statement. So the do while loop has to have this semicolon here. The while loop does not use a semicolon in the while loop here at the end. So and this is a do while loop, and this is also a do while loop. I'm just going to add one more print so that we have a blank line in between all of our outputs. So let's run this code and see if we see any difference. Okay. And looking here, it looks like we get the exact same output. And if we step through the code, we can see, run the code, then check. So 5 minus 1 is 4, check 4. 4 minus 1 is 3, check 3. 3 minus 1 is 2, check 2. 2 minus 1 is 1, check 1. 1 minus 1 is 0, check 0. And check 0 fails, so we just go to the next line. We don't go back to the top here. Up here it's check 5, 5, 5 minus 1 is 4, check 4. So we get the same pattern and we get the exact same behavior. So in some cases, that works out fine. Now, if we look at these, they're both checking that the value is greater than 0. So even if I do just 1 for both of these, we'll say 1 here. And if I run this code, okay, I get the exact same printout. So in both cases, the value succeeded on the first try. And so if we did 0 though, this could be interesting because 0 is where the condition fails. So we're starting with what would be a failed condition for the while loop, and it would be a failed condition for the do while loop. But in this case, we'll see the while loop doesn't run because it checks the condition before it runs, whereas the do while loop checks the condition after it runs, so it has to run at least once. Even if I set this to some much smaller value, -10 is much smaller than the value that our condition is checking for. All right, this loop never runs because it's a precondition loop and the condition failed on the first attempt or on the first iteration. We say that each run of a loop is called an iteration. So that's a word you'll hear. And in this case, even though the condition failed on the first iteration, because we run the code before we check the condition, we get this printout of having -10, and then it fails out. So these are your kind of your two big loops. There are a couple of other loops that we'll look at in coming up videos and much later videos, but these are kind of the first two loops you really get exposure to. Other than the fact that a do-while loop is guaranteed to run at least once, a while loop and a do-while loop are basically the same.